Hello. Happy birthday to Sadie Hartman. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your celebration, celebrating horror 2021. And thank you for all that you do to support horror and promote all of the good work being done out there. We appreciate you. Enjoy your birthday. So, my name is Regina Garza Mitchell, and I will be reading from my book today, Shadow of the Vulture, available from Death's Head Press. And I will just give you the first chapter in hopes that you will like it and go out and read the rest of it. They had been fighting for months, the battles moving as each side pushed forward and fell back. This would be the last battle. They had lost too many men, and the other side hadn't lost enough. Cannons were delivered and wheeled out onto the field. Some of the men were afraid of the iron weapons, scared they would blow themselves up, and they probably would. Juana and Annalisa took charge of one, working together to load the heavy iron balls and fire them. They had wounded several and killed a few men, each splash of red energizing them. For the first time, they felt they could win this fight. They had to, or the invaders would continue creeping in, taking over. Ravages and plundering had happened in Mexico already. Juana was determined it wouldn't happen to her parents, to her home. She finished tamping down the barrel and turned to her friend. Annalisa's usual smile was on her face, and then the left side of her head disappeared in a squelch of red-black. Smoke rose from her seared skin. She remained standing for a moment before crumpling to the ground. The world shifted, and Juana felt herself fall, knew she would continue falling for the rest of her life. But she was still on her feet, and there was no time to help, no time to mourn or comprehend what had just happened. She had to fire the weapon herself. It didn't matter who had done it. They were all responsible. Taking the land and now the one person she loved the most. The person who had trusted her and followed her here. She thought you would watch over her, be her guardian angel, Juana thought. But you let her die, let them kill her. Annalisa is dead. The word echoed down the empty chamber that was her mind. Juana fired the cannon, the heavy ball falling uselessly to the ground, not hitting anyone. She looked around. Men were strewn on both sides of the field, some hurt, some dead. Some fell as she watched, bodies thudding quietly amidst the roar of cannon and rifle fire and screaming voices. Not all who fell were dead. She ran over the empty part of the field to the other side, ignoring the often unreliable revolver in its holster on her hip, grabbing instead the knife her father had bought her from Monterey. The shaft and hilt were pure silver, blessed by a curandero for protection. Symbols and sigils decorated its handle. She didn't know what the designs meant, but she knew they were powerful. Should have given it to Annalisa. Her hat flew off her head, and her hair blew around her face. "A woman!" screamed an enemy soldier, a mix of rage and amusement on his face. "Look at this crazy bitch! What the fuck?" Her knife cut off the man's next words, slurring them into a gurgle as she slashed across his mouth, his jutting tongue, and down his throat, relishing the warmth of the stream as it flowed out of him. She spit on him before moving on, conjuring up all of the hatred she could into the wad of phlegm. She yelled and cursed like a madwoman as she thrust and stabbed, feeling the suck of flesh, the jolt of bone. She didn't care anymore, looked forward to joining Annalisa. But she would take some of these bastards with her, would continue fighting them all the way to hell. The knife grew slippery, but she held it tightly, thrusting, pulling, stabbing, slashing. The blade was sharp and did its work well, as though enjoying its purpose. She was joined by others with swords and knives, taking this gun-reliant army by surprise. They didn't know the meaning of true courage, the rush of closing in on your enemy, feeling his guts with your fingers, squeezing the slippery entrails to make him scream, the insertion of blade through skin that parted as easily as a whore's thighs. The sheer delight of bathing in the blood of your enemies, knowing they would breathe no more because of you. Juana laughed in someone else's voice as she wielded her knife, a loud keening that sounded more like crying. Only she never cried. Eventually it ended, one side or both retreating. Juana's arm was numb, her torn clothes covered in bits of flesh and gore, flies landing and re-landing. I am clothed in the body of my enemies. She wanted to laugh, felt the flies' spindly legs like tongues lapping the blood off her skin. Her right hand was stuck in a fist, curled tightly around the knife. She could not open her hand. It would not respond. The flies continued to buzz and scratch and taste. A cloud of gnats and flies hovered around her, landing and tasting the glue on her skin, her clothes. One crawled over her lips as she licked them, feeling its spindly legs before it lazily flew up and landed on her cheek. Her arm felt weighted down. She could barely move, could only look around her. The bodies on the field hummed with insects taking sustenance from the fallen. She wondered how long it would take before they laid eggs inside of the fallen bodies. Crows had begun to peck choice bits from the bodies of the fallen, stretching meat and muscle until it tore free so they could swallow it down. The velvet touch of fly legs on her face sent her over the edge as they fed off the flecks of flesh and blood coating her skin. She vomited, her right fist still curled around the knife so tightly the sigils imprinted themselves on her palm. The pool of sick drew some of the flies away, its rancid odor an invitation to yet another feast, but the meteor scent of her grue-covered skin retained its allure for some. She shooed them away with her left hand while her aching right arm dangled. She stepped back, not wanting to see the damaged bodies around her, only wanting Annalisa, but not the way she was now. She didn't dare think the word, but death was all around. She wore it in the streaks of red-brown on her clothing, her skin, tasted and smelled its putrescence. Death was everywhere on the battlefield. It was the living who intruded. She plodded back across the field, stepping over downed men until she reached the cannon. Annalisa lay there, her remaining eye looking surprised, half of her face stuck in a smile. "Pretty bad, yeah?" Annalisa said. She stood behind Juana, also looking down at her dead body. "At least it was quick, and I didn't piss myself like Roberto did." She shook her head. "That poor guy. What a way to go." "But I know, it's weird." Juana shook her head, closed her eyes, opened them. Annalisa still stood there beside her, still lay on the ground. A line of small red ants had begun a trail into the good side of her mouth. Black insects covered her eyes, drank from the blood that spilled out of her body. Juana looked again at her ruined friend standing beside her and gave in to the darkness.